This is going to be a short video explaining my process for scanning film using VueScan and the Lightroom plugin called Negative Lab Pro. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible, so try to follow along. I have VueScan open right here, and I'm going to uh, immediately set it to professional. And I want to go quickly over what all these things are, at least the ones that matter. Your task is to scan the file. You're not going to go to printer or anything like that. Your source is going to be your scanner, whatever your scanner may be, if it's an Epson V600 or a Plustek Optic Film 8200i or a Nikon CoolScan or whatever your scanner is. Your media is going to be image. I know you have other options here, but we're not going to use them for this tutorial. Bits per pixel, we're going to go with 48-bit RGB. I will prepare a different tutorial for doing infrared detection, but for now let's do 48-bit RGB so you understand how this process works. Your preview resolution is going to be as low as possible, just to make it a little bit quicker. Scan resolution is going to be as high as your scanner allows. My scanner, after some testing, I've determined that 3600 dpi is as far as it goes reliably. If I take it any higher, it'll take way longer to do the scan, but it will not give me any better results. So I'm going to leave it at 3600. If you're using a Epson V600, for example, your resolution will be more along the lines of 1600 or maybe 2400 dpi, no matter what your scanner uh, literature says. It's not as high as it says it is. You need to do your tests, and you'll find that even though it says maybe 9600 dpi, that's not true. It's just not. Um, we're going to not do any auto flipping, no rotation, no auto skew, no mirroring. This is all for when you want to make sure that your image is oriented properly. We're going to auto save when you scan. No printing, no repeating. The number of passes means that it'll scan once and then it'll scan a second time over the same one in order to reduce noise. In my experience, this doesn't do anything, so don't bother. It'll just take longer and it won't do anything. Multi-exposure is like sort of like HDR, so it'll try to scan your negative in two different exposure levels and then try to merge them to create a better dynamic range in the image. In my experience, it doesn't help very much either, so I like to leave it off. You can go ahead and test it. Your results may vary. And log exposure, we're going to use that in a moment, so let's check this out. Let's preview my negative and see what shows up. Cool. So I have this picture of this church, and if I go to crop here and I were to select maximum, it would select my entire image, including the parts that are not the negative. In order to do this process right, for the first image in your roll, you're going to go ahead and select your negative only. Don't select anything outside of it. And you'll see that the image gets a tiny bit brighter. Once it does that, you're going to click Lock Exposure, and that'll give your scanner the level of exposure that it requires to get the best possible scan from this roll. You only have to do this once per roll. You scan that first image, you preview that first image, you lock exposure, and you leave that locked for the rest of your roll. So now that I have that locked, I'm going to return the crop to maximum. Um, this may be different for you. If you're using a flatbed scanner, you're going to want to select your negative like so, maybe with a little bit of border, just to make sure you get the entire image. I like to get the entire image and then crop later in Lightroom. That makes sure that I never miss any detail. As it is, I'm going to select the entire thing, maximum, um, because my scanner is a dedicated scanner and it only scans one frame at a time. So I'm going to do it like that. When it comes to filter, I'm going to turn this off because I'm not doing infrared scanning at this moment. I'll show you how to use that later. Um, color, let's set that to none because we're not going to be using this at all. And the output, this is very important. If you do not select a folder here, a default folder to save your pictures, your pictures will not get saved, and VueScan will not tell you that your pictures are not getting saved. It will simply uh, do the scan, it'll do everything, but it will never save the image. You really want this to be selected. For the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to save it on the desktop in a new folder called Scanning Tutorial. And I'm going to click it, click OK. So my pictures are saving there. Printed size doesn't matter because we're not using that. Auto file name, yes. We're not going to need a JPEG. We're not going to need a log file. What we need is a raw file. We're going to call this raw. I like to use this methodology, but you can name it whatever you want. I like to call it year, month, day, and negative number, which is starting at 0001. The plus sign means that if there's a 0001, it'll go ahead and switch it to 2, and then 3, and then 4, and consecutively. We're not reducing the raw size. We're using 48-bit RGB raw file type. This is crucial. If it's not this, your negative will not work in Negative Lab Pro. It will give you really funky colors. So make sure that this is set to 48-bit RGB. Raw output with scan. We're going to leave it in scan for this tutorial. Raw compression off. Raw save film, if you're wondering what that is, that will save your negative with infrared edits if we were to do them. Again, I will talk about that in a later tutorial. And this is important. We're saving a raw DNG format. So all our settings are done, and I'm going to go ahead and press scan. Good. Now that we have that done, I'm going to go ahead and open Lightroom. We're only doing one negative for the purposes of this tutorial, but I can teach you later how to do a batch scan. We're going to go into the desktop and find the scanning tutorial folder and use this result. I'm going to bring it in. I don't want to move it, I just want to add it. I'm importing the file. And here it is. This is our negative, and this is what we're going to work with. Negative Lab Pro does this really wonderful thing where uh, it will automatically adjust. It'll automatically invert your picture from negative to positive with all the corrections that it needs to make in order to produce a good image. Traditional methods like using just VueScan or using Epson Scan or using Silverfast require you to do a hell of a lot of work getting that color right, making sure that you select the proper film profile so that it uses the correct orange mask to bring that color into life. Negative Lab Pro is a much simpler plugin, and it's very effective at getting the color rights from the get-go. So we're going to go ahead and crop the image. Let's make sure I do a 2x3. This is our image. We're going to go to Plugin Extras, Negative Lab Pro. I like to leave a little bit of a border, especially if you have, let's say we forgot to crop it or we don't want to crop it. If there's just a little bit of edges, you can tell it like, oh, ignore that 5% of the edge so that you don't try to do the conversion using that edge because that will screw up the method it does for inverting the negative. You want Negative Lab Pro to only be using the actual negative to invert the colors. I forgot to tell you about the source. If you were doing a DSLR scan, like taking pictures of your film, you'd use this one. But we're doing VueScan's raw DNG, so we're selecting that one. Color model, I like to leave it in Frontier. You can use Noritsu instead if you think the results are better. Go ahead and try it out if you like. It's really not that different, but it's an option. And pre-saturation, what this does is that it changes the saturation level of your negative before doing the conversion. I like to leave it on default, but if your images don't look as well as they should, you can try different saturation levels before you convert. Um, this is not relevant to the tutorial right now, so we're just gonna skip it. Leave it at default. Convert negative. We're gonna let Negative Lab Pro do its magic, and we're done. This is a pretty good conversion of this negative. I'm going to reset my settings because I had some settings saved from the last scan, and we're gonna see which one of these settings works best. Standard might work better. It's a little bit brighter. Linear is a more linear curve rather than a bit of a logarithmic curve. Um, that's as best as I can explain it, but I'm not entirely sure. And linear plus gamma gives you a little bit of a darker tone where it sort of looks like it would look on a print. I like to play around with these, see which one works best, because at least for my purposes, most of my work goes online. Um, so I don't really, I use these to my advantage. I use these to see which one I think looks best for my film. Um, I'm gonna go ahead with maybe linear, lower the brightness a little bit, increase the contrast a little bit. Let's go with standard and just bump up the brightness a bit because these shadows look a little better in my opinion. And we can play with these a little bit. And let's say you want these clouds to not look so blown out. You could use a soft highs and it will sort of wash them out a little bit. Same thing you can do with the shadows. Like look at these bells. If we press soft lows, they'll look a little less, a little brighter. It's really hard to see, but yeah. And then you have this setting here where you can do different color film profiles. This is just a minor adjustment that you can do. So you can select neutral, which will give you a pretty good rendition of color. Let's say you wanted it to look a little warmer, you'd go with warming, and it'll make it a tiny bit warmer. Play around with these, see what works for you. And then this is super important. Your sharpen, you want to leave this on scanner. If you do default or lab, Lightroom will add a level of noise reduction, color noise reduction that will screw up your image dramatically. You can always bring it back to 0 because Lightroom lets you do that, but I like to keep it like this from the get-go because it makes my life easier. And I like to make a copy because editing a TIFF copy of this DNG will be way easier in Lightroom than editing the DNG itself. Let's apply. And now I have these two images. I have the DNG and I have the TIFF. Just so you get an idea of why it's so important to not edit the DNG, I will show you this. If I were to do a contrast adjustment, like a curves adjustment, look at what happens. See how these blues come out and they look all weird? If I do this, it looks really, really odd. But it looks even worse when you do stuff like white balance. Let's say you want to white balance a little more. It'll do some funky stuff like that. Lightroom settings do not work well with these negative Lab Pro adjusted DNGs, which is why I try not to touch them. I make a TIFF copy and I edit the TIFF copy if I had to. Now, this film has quite a few scratches because I've used it for many other videos, and I've really just kind of thrown it around. And you can sort of uh, fix these things with the healing brush. You can work around them, or you can bring this image into Photoshop and work on it from there. Now, let me show you one more thing so that you're aware of it. If you were to use a DNG and you do this, you say sharpen default, it'll do this weird thing where it tries to like reduce color noise, and then look at these clouds. I don't know if you can see it, but the colors get contaminated in a way that I don't exactly know how to describe because of the color noise that is already present in the negative. It makes these weird colors for some reason. DNG does not play well with the color noise reduction. The DNG, I mean the TIFF on the other hand, let's use that's the same part. The TIFF on the other hand, having the color noise, if I were to reduce it a little bit, it looks fine. It looks way, way, way better than this, which looks the film has a natural color noise to it, and you don't want to remove that or your film will look really odd. I mean, you do whatever you want, but that's what I like to do. So I hope this gives you a good idea of how film scanning works when you're using a flatbed or dedicated scanner with VueScan and the Negative Lab Pro plugin on Lightroom. Um, I've been scanning for almost 2 years now, and I have not found a process that makes it easier for me to get good results in a reasonable amount of time. I used to do my color correction with Epson Scan at first, and then I did it with VueScan, which made it a little bit easier. But overall, I was never able to get the best results in a reasonable amount of time using any of these things. So I like to use VueScan as a raw scanning software and let Negative Lab Pro do the dirty work for me and get those colors as good as I can get them without worrying so much about color correcting as I'm scanning. It makes the process a lot faster, and it definitely makes my stress levels go down dramatically. If you have any questions or if you have any feedback for me, I am more than happy to hear it. So let me know what you think, and thank you so much for watching.